Camera news, let's take a look at some of the recent releases from Fujifilm, Panasonic, and a few other interesting things. First off, Fujifilm is going to release the X-T50. It's APS-C, obviously, but 40.2 megapixels, so you're going to have a lot of resolution on APS-C sensor if you're interested in that. It does have shake reduction in the body, which is nice to see. Single card slot, 1/4000th of a second mechanical shutter speed. So that's kind of on the lower end. Usually higher end cameras have 1/8000th for a physical shutter. Flash sync speed of 1/180th of a second. That's relatively standard for that level of shutter. Electronic viewfinder, 2.36 million dots. That's on the low end. Kind of odd considering the price of this camera. Video features up to 6.2K, which is pretty impressive, but I don't know what the record times on this thing are going to be. Official battery life numbers, 390 frames in economy mode. It's got a rounded body shape this time instead of the more traditional look of the cameras, while still kind of sort of keeping that retro design. It has a bunch of their film simulations right on one of the dials, which is an interesting choice. You still have exposure compensation dial and shutter speed. Has an auto mode. Woohoo! $1,400 USD. I don't understand the pricing of this camera, considering the viewfinder is one of the lowest resolutions available these days. I guess if you're really into Fujifilm stuff, you like how it looks, you like the simulations, that's one of your key features to have. Might as well check it out, but with all the other options out there, a Nikon Z5 you can easily get for $1,000, and this is more expensive than that. You will get some better video features on this camera, but it is an APS-C sensor versus the full frame camera. And in photography situations, you probably get better burst rates and such with this camera. They also announced the 16-50 f2.8 to 4.8 R LM WR lens. Looks pretty nice. Seems relatively compact considering you get a decent amount of focal length range. Fujifilm announced the GFX 100S Mark II medium format camera. It's going to be around $5,000 to start. 102 megapixel, so that's a lot. 4K video. 5.76 million dot viewfinder, very nice. That's a good resolution, especially for a higher end camera. I think you can get more pixels, or dots as they say, but that's pretty decent. They are transitioning this camera more towards full frame cameras with their level of specifications, their autofocus features, all that good stuff is coming into Fujifilm's mirrorless medium format. So it's nice to see them continuing to improve on this level of camera. Obviously, it's going to be more expensive than some full-frame mirrorless, but it's actually cheaper than others. And they continue to push in that format. Probably one of the better or the best medium format mirrorless system to get into. With that, they announced this 500 f5.6. Pretty pricey lens, but a good amount of range to it. Here's the full-frame equivalent field of view, 396 millimeters, but obviously not a cheap lens. If you need it, you need it type of thing. Canon did actually mention their R1, but they didn't give many details on it yet. They haven't said if it's global shutter. I kind of doubt that it is. Did mention that it has an accelerator processor in addition to their Digic X. So they might be struggling to get enough processing power to do even higher speed photography than they currently do. Is cool. I don't know. If you need this type of camera, you know you'll need it. And if you're into Canon, this is going to be your option to get into even higher speed sports photography, all that stuff. That's about it for that. And obviously the A9 III has been known for quite a while. If you want global shutter, this is going to be your camera to check out. Panasonic did announce some firmware updates for the S5ii and S5ii, improving the functionality of the camera, proxy video recording, improved basic performance, so autofocus, eye recognition. That's always nice to see improvements there. Enhanced electronic stabilization feature, burst shooting. Yeah, so it's nice that they're continuing to improve on this camera. If I were capable of switching systems, which I'm not, but the S5ii would probably be it. I'd pick up 2 of those and a set of lenses, an L mount. Very nice camera, especially for video work, but it would be great for photos as well. The sensor isn't the best. The readout performance isn't great, but it's kind of good enough. It hits that level, in my opinion, but you will potentially get some wobbliness in certain situations if you're panning the camera and video, stuff like that, or different types of photography. With that, they announced the Lumix S9. It's basically like the S5 II, but much, much smaller. They took out some features, they added a few little things here and there, but you get a very compact full frame camera, minus the shutter, so there's no mechanical shutter. It's a little odd. I guess they wanted to get it as small as possible, but it does have in-body stabilization, so they kept that in there, which is definitely good, especially for video, but photos as well, depending. They're really pushing the LUT features on this camera, which is similar to Fujifilm's film simulations, but they call it LUTs, and LUTs are lookup tables, more so in video that word has been used, but they're trying to make it apply to everything, which is fine. With the announcement of the S9, they announced this Lumix S26mm f8. Doesn't have any autofocus. It's f8 aperture fixed, so you can't go to a smaller aperture. If you want really unusual lens, and for $200 MSRP, odd, but I guess at least it's an option, and it's going to be a nice size for the S9. So, I mean, if you want a manual lens that's officially branded, I guess you could consider this thing. The MSRP of this camera is going to be $1,500 USD. The size looks great. Doesn't have a viewfinder, so it's an odd combination of photo and video features, but there's a lot of compromise because it doesn't have the mechanical shutter. I don't think it's going to be amazing for photos, but it will certainly be serviceable in many situations. But if you are into flash photography, don't buy this camera. The shoe is a cold shoe, it's not a hot shoe, so it's more so for placing microphones and such, but it doesn't have monitoring of audio, has a micro HDMI, has USB-C, and it also has a bunch of recording time limits. Considering the size, it makes sense. Niche use case type of camera. If you already are in L mount, or you want to get into L mount and you want some more versatility to your kit, getting one of these in addition to the S5 II would be a pretty nice combination. Considering it's the same sensor, you're probably going to get the same look out of the video, out of the photos. And in my case, I would definitely like to use this thing in convention situation because it's even more compact than the Z5 that I use currently, and it's actually pretty close in size to the Fujifilm X100. Obviously the lenses are going to make it much bigger and much thicker. It's nice to see Panasonic trying to move forward with all these interesting ideas and different shapes and sizes of cameras while still keeping the L mount, the full frame. I'm very much not a fan of cameras that overheat in video. That burned me with the Nikon Z30 that I still have. It doesn't do 4K video for more than 35 minutes or so. Run it with HDMI out with the DC coupler, and it uses wall power, so it's not generating heat from the battery, and it still overheats in the same amount of time. I would like to eventually get rid of it, but I don't have any reasonable options that I could get into at the moment. L mount is looking pretty cool, and related to that, Sigma announced the 24-70 f2.8 DG DN2, and this is L mount and E mount. Probably be a nice combination for the S5 II, S5 IIX in video situations. From what I've seen of this so far, it was, I think Petapixel did a review on it. It doesn't have a lot of focus breathing, which is very nice for video people. Nice option. It's not the cheapest thing ever at $1,200, but for a 24-70 2.8. I did notice that AstrHori announced or released the 85 1.8 full frame for Nikon Z. I still do have the Nikon cameras. I already have an 85, but for $250, anyone that is interested in that focal length and aperture combination with autofocus might as well consider it. It's a pretty cheap lens for what you get. Obviously, I don't know how it works in practice, but interesting nonetheless. Pretty cool, and it has firmware updates. MTF doesn't look amazing, but might be decent. Related to Nikon, they have a few announcements. They announced their first group of creators, which I don't know too many of them. I have seen some of Brandon's videos. I don't know how often he posts these days, but he's going to be one of their official creators. What else they got? Nikon is also announcing a collaboration backpack, actually, made for creators. Ooh, it's very dark. Can't really see it. They didn't even show a good photo of it. Okay. It's not really much news from Nikon. We'll see what happens once they have more time to interact with Red for the video stuff. The last thing we're going to talk about is the Petapixel looked at this AI image generator, avoids copyright issues by training on corrupted photos. Obviously, a lot of the easy things for this quote-unquote AI stuff these days is in art, photos, and text. It's just the easier things for these type of systems to work with. It's disappointing to see that that's the main focus for the people working on these systems, to basically replace a lot of art, a lot of imagery, but that's just gonna how it's gonna be, I guess. At the very least, this thing uses corrupted images to produce what people are trying to get, I guess. And I think that's more of a reasonable take than just using copyrighted images of people's faces, using people's likenesses, which is something they shouldn't be doing. So this seems like a somewhat reasonable compromise. 93% of the pixels are missing from this image on the side. And then the actual data here, as an example, in the research document, you can see the corrupted image, you can see what was generated from it, and then the nearest neighbor generation. She looks like she's from the Brady Bunch. Anyways, if you're interested in this document, there is a lot of information, and I mean a lot. Pretty cool, and I think this is moving towards more of a reasonable take on training, at the very least. I'm not a big fan, obviously, of that stable diffusion stuff, but it's not going to go away. So if they can find more compromise like this, I think it's a good thing. That's it for the photo video news. Hope you enjoyed it. Skype Photography Banzai. Thanks.